Good day, fellow deal makers. Welcome to the Deal Scout. On today's show, we're going to have a conversation with the SaaS guru, Mr. Anthony. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Josh. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, if you're meeting someone for coffee and they go SaaS guru, what the heck is that? Like, how do you even start to explain what that is?
Well, you know what a software company is, right?
Yes, I do.
So, I mean, we all have like Microsoft or we've got G Suite or whatever it happens to be. I said, well, when you pay for that, it's a subscription. And SaaS is just a fancy way of saying software subscription. So the companies that do software subscriptions, that's what I specialize in. And I specialize on the finance side of things.
Okay, got it. So, give us an idea on what kind of SaaS companies do you like working with? Because working on the finance side. So, what kind of companies do you like working with? And specifically, like, what companies would you not like working with?
I don't really draw a line.
Okay.
I work primarily just because of how things have fallen out. Primarily B2B, business to business SaaS companies. I do have B2C companies, and we also have companies that are not SaaS, but they're recurring revenue companies. So memberships, like for example, if you have a membership, say with a professional organization, so that's also a kind of recurring revenue, but we don't call it SaaS. So really anything. I work with companies in cybersecurity, health tech, augmented reality, fintech. It really runs the gamut.
Got it. So, you can work with a Microsoft all the way to I want to build a membership site out for my, you know, personal training, whatever, right?
Whatever it happens to be, exactly.
Copy that. All right. So getting into this, how did you one day wake up and you're like, I'm going to be the software guy. I'm going to be the SaaS guru. Like, how does one become the SaaS guru?
It was a dark and rainy night in an alley. No, I was just kidding. I
That's how
first started.
Batman started. Why
Yeah,
not?
that's yeah, and of course he was an orphan at the time. We don't want to talk about that, but
Yeah.
my first SaaS client was actually back in 2007, before the term was even really that widely used. And it was here actually in Michigan, of all strange places. You'd think of, like Silicon Valley being the leading cutting edge, but there's a lot of activity in SaaS in Michigan, in particular in Ann Arbor and Detroit. But I started with SaaS back in 2007. I've been doing the fractional CFO type of work probably since probably 16, 17 years now. Before that, I had real jobs. Now I have my own company, and it wasn't something that I just happened to wake up one day and say I'm going to do SaaS. It was when I started. Most of our clients were in manufacturing. This is being Michigan and automotive in particular. But with all the various shocks and financial crises and whatnot, eventually they fell to the wayside. And I said, you know what, software is a longer term play for us. And so I began to move more and more into that space until now we are exclusively SaaS, and that's all we do.
Got it. So I love the idea of this is all we do, right? Like you're the guru, and to be a guru, you have to say no to other things. When it comes to deals, right? So SaaS is your only focus. What kind of deals are tempting for you to kind of explore, right? Because as an entrepreneur, for me, shiny syndrome, like I'm always seeing opportunity, but for you to say this is all we focus on, like if there was something that would distract you, what would it be?
If you offered me a position with NASA, that might distract me.
Yeah, you want to go to the moon, right?
Yeah, being a rocket scientist was always one of those things that was kind of like a dream of mine, but never materialized. But other
Yeah.
than that, no. I mean, there's so much exciting stuff going on in software when you think about, artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality. There's a lot of cutting edge stuff out there, and I like being on the edge of things, not, following along. And software is also something that's becoming more and more, say, recession proof or recession resistant. So it's not like, goods, tangible goods tend to go up and down. We all are aware of these issues right now in our economy, but software seems to be fairly insulated from that, depending on what market they're in.
Yeah, copy that. So, what were you doing prior to 2007 when you kind of landed into software as a service? Were you working your way towards becoming a NASA astronaut or something?
No, actually, I have this kind of strange past. I was originally a medical student
Okay.
at the University of Michigan, And I got into about the first or second year of the actual medical school program, and it's like, okay, this is not for me. This was a mistake. I do not want to be a doctor. When you take a look at how hard those people have to work to study and become doctors, I'm like, I don't really want to do it. I'm not into it. And so, what do you do with a partial medical degree when you're dropping out of school? Well, in this case here, manufacturing was the next thing because there was just a lot of manufacturing there in the time. And they both started with M, so I figured why not? But the funny thing is that when I got into manufacturing, I realized that it was really no different than medicine in that you're dealing with highly complex interrelated systems that all have to be functioning at an optimal level in order to achieve, maximal health, if you were. And I've never really gotten away from that caregiver type of attitude towards fixing problems. And also, one of the things that was trained into us was don't treat symptoms, try and find your root causes. And so that translated also very easily into manufacturing. So when they first hired me, it's like, well, we think we got a good spot for you. And immediately what started happening was they would have these really intractable problems either in the supply chain or something. And they'd say, here, let's give it to Anthony and see if he can fix it. And I would. And I'd go on to the next and the next and the next. So eventually I became at the time was a Six Sigma black belt process re-engineer. I worked for the Japanese for a while, actually speak the language. And I was able to, incorporate a lot of the quality assurance and total quality management techniques that they teach you in manufacturing. And then when I got into a full blown accounting job, which my first accounting job was as a controller of a Japanese manufacturing plant here in Michigan. I was given basically a 70,000 square foot empty building, and I was told, you have responsibility for every electron that does not drive a manufacturing machine. Make sure that you have the three people that you have right now to run your back office are the same three people when we multiply our revenue times 10. So we had a $5 million company, a brand new space. We had contracts that were going to grow us to 50 million in the next 3 years. And my mission was to design all of the finance, accounting, information systems, the whole 9 yards to scale it. And I did it. In the end, we had the same three people working in the back office that we did in the beginning, and I automated the living daylights out of everything, and we had, everything that we needed at our fingertips.
Super cool. Now, that was a great accomplishment, but the thing that really stood out in my mind is you speak Japanese. So I need your help for a second, and I'm putting you on the spot. In your
Okay.
best Japanese radio voice, could you say, like, "Welcome to the Deal Scout, a show all about deals" in Japanese or something like that?
No. Ohio gozaimasu. That's about it right now. Good morning.
Yeah, very good.
I'm learning Mandarin and Greek right now. So those, every time I try to speak Japanese, I think those languages are going to try and come out.
Yeah, it's all Greek to me. Why Greek though?
My father was from Greece. My
Okay.
late father, he passed away a long time ago. And it was one of those things that I wish he had taught us kids Greek when we were kids. And so, one day, just out of the blue, I said, you know what? I was reading an article about Duolingo, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, huh, why shouldn't I give that a try? And so I downloaded the app and I signed up for it and I paid for the premium and I've been learning Greek ever since. And it's fun. I basically spend 15 minutes, half an hour every night just learning Greek.
And they happen to be a software company. Are they one of your clients too?
No, they're not. They're publicly traded, so they're a little bit out of my range at this point.
Copy that. All right. So you started, why not? I'm going to medical school. Maybe the sight of blood or man, too much studying. What's next in the glossary? OM also manufacturing. So you move over to manufacturing, and you kind of start in operations, right? Six
Yep.
Sigma and your process improvement. You're looking at this, and then you built and scaled it out, and then
Hmm.
you moved into accounting, like that natural progression. How long did that take you in your career to figure out like accounting and finance is actually my sweet spot?
There was a step in between that I kind of glossed over, which is I went from medicine to manufacturing, and then from manufacturing, I went into ERP installations.
What's
So this
that?
is back before, this is in the late 90s when everybody was panicking that when the year 2000 would come along, they would, their code would blow up, the whole Y2K scare, right?
Yeah.
So everybody and their brother and sister was out there buying ERP systems. And so there's this tremendous demand for folks that knew manufacturing, they knew information. And I also had been accumulating some accounting chops on the side because one of the things that I had learned was that there's a lot of information in accounting that is really useful to the organization. You really need to know the numbers side of the organization. To me, it was like the nervous system of the body was the accounting and information system of the organization, because without that, you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going. And so they hired me in to do ERP implementations and immediately put me as a director, because I actually, knew a few things about manufacturing and accounting. And so that went on for a few years. I did that with a company called TRW. You may have heard of them, in their IT division. And then right around the year 1999, we weren't all out there partying like Prince would like us to do. What was happening was that if you had not purchased your ERP project by then, because back then you had to do this on premise. There was no SaaS. Okay, this was all on premise hardware and software. So if you hadn't bought your, $2.5 to $5 million worth of servers and your very expensive ERP system and started your implementation, you were hosed. Okay, by the time, because it takes a year and a half at least to implement these things. Back then it did. And so what was happening was the sales were starting to fall off. The new business was starting to fall off a cliff in 1999. So by the end of 1999, about the fourth quarter, we had no business. There was no, because everybody had either bought their ERP and was already on the way to implementation, or they were heads down trying to fix their internal code. Nobody was buying new software. And so seeing the handwriting on the wall, it's like, okay, this isn't going to last long. You can't have a practice of a whole bunch of people, and the layoff started. So I started looking for a job, another job, and I got this job as a controller for a Japanese company that had an American company that had just been acquired by the Japanese. And the American head, the president of the company, did not want a Japanese to come in and run the finance. He wanted an American to come in and run the finance. So he did a quick move and hired somebody, and it happened to be me. Because he knew they were going to scale. And so he said, even though I was not a CPA, I was a CMA actually at the time. And I didn't have any hands-on experience with accounting. I had never had an accounting job in my life. They hired me in as the controller anyway. And so the first, I would say 3 months of that job, I don't think I slept because I was in total panic mode, like I was going to screw something up. It's like, okay, I need to learn how to be a controller. So I went and got books and studied and just learned how to be a controller. And so that's how that transition works. So it was medicine to manufacturing to ERP to controller. Then that lasted for about 5 years. And once we had things all dialed up, there really wasn't much left to do. I mean, once your systems are all set up and going, you know, honestly, if I had a day a week of real work, that was a busy week.
Yeah.
It was just, I had dialed it in so well that I spent most of my time reading the Wall Street Journal and walking around on the shop floor trying to find things that weren't working right, and having long coffees and whatnot. But I was bored, and I felt like I wasn't growing. There was nothing. I could still be in this job today if I wanted it, but I didn't. And so I said, all right, what's the next fun thing? And after accounting, the next fun thing with numbers is finance. And finance is a lot more interesting and fun than accounting because it's forward looking, it's anticipatory, it's predictive, it's strategic in nature. Accounting is, I'm sorry if there are any accountants out there. I apologize. I'm a CPA. I'm a recovering CPA, as I like to tell folks. It's historical. It's looking in the rearview mirror of your car at what's already happened. And while that's incredibly useful, and you do need that information, it's, to me, is not nearly as exciting as finance. So I packed my bags and took a year and a half off and went and got a finance degree, master's of finance degree.
Took a year and a half off?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So going back to school, how old were you when you were going back to school?
That would have been, gosh, I have to think about that. Late 30s.
Okay. What was your, what was going through your head? You're, talking to friends or family and you're like, "You know what? I'm going to take a year off. I'm going to go back to school." What was the conversation like there?
You are out of your mind. You are nuts. What are you thinking of? You got this great six-figure job. You don't have to do anything. Are you crazy? I mean, and then there was one, a very close friend of mine. She said, if that's where your heart's leading you, then that's where you need to go.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's, I'm, I didn't really, I heard all the conversations and it's like, well, this isn't the first time that I've done something that everybody thought I was nuts about, which was quitting medical school. So it's not like I haven't been through this merry-go-round before. So, I'd already like, all right, well, I've made the decision and I've never looked back. It was a great decision because when I came back, instead of getting into a salary job, I hooked up with a guy who was already doing fractional, call it controller work and whatnot. And he needed a partner. He needed because he had more business than he knew what to do with, and so that's basically 2006. That's when I started doing the full blown, fractional CFO controller work, and have been doing it for the most part since then, with a couple of salary jobs during that period where I had to work for a couple of unicorns here in Ann Arbor.
Yeah. All right. So, finance, I like the way you describe that. Finance is future thinking, forward, strategic, and accounting is kind of looking historically backwards. And you prefer, just preference, you prefer focusing on that and coming in as a fractional guy, focus on finance and, controlling, CFO. What would you if I have a SaaS company and I need to bring you in, what kind of problem do I have that I pick up the phone book like when they had phone books back in the day and they say I need this help? Like what kind of problem would I have where I would reach out to you?
So it really kind of falls into two categories. We have what I call the first time founder CEO and then the repeat founder CEO. In the case of the first time founder CEO, where they really start to feel the pain points are they get started, somebody sets them up on QuickBooks, usually their tax CPA or the CPA they've been dealing with because, hey, I need to start tracking, my cash and my accounting and whatnot. And the CPA sets up the accounting system, but it's set up for tax. It's not really set up to run the business. And those are two very different worlds. If you think accounting itself has a breakdown between, financial accounting and tax accounting. Tax does not look at the world in any and it looks at the world in a very strange way, which is why I don't do tax. But they have things set up in a way that makes it easy to do the tax returns. And so for a while, that's okay. You can start off with that. You're basically managing by your bank account. How much cash do I have? And, right now, do I have enough cash to run through the next few payrolls? When you're first starting out as the CEO founder, you're the chief cook and bottle washer, you're doing it all, making sure the accountants take care of the numbers. But sooner or later, you're going to come to a point where you need SaaS metrics and you need SaaS financial statements and you need numbers that SaaS investors are going to want to see when they are looking at you in due diligence and looking whether to invest in you or not. Or your board is asking for numbers and you're standing there saying, well, yeah, I'll get those, but you don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And your tax CPA can't help you out because they don't know how. So usually there's a pain point that's reached where the founder's like, I need these numbers and I'm tired of not having them. And more important, I need to know how my business is really performing as a SaaS company, not just as a company. And so they need that information. It's usually when we are brought in, when they find us, and the first thing we have to do is fix a bunch of stuff that was done, set up incorrectly, and fix some historicals, and set up a lot of systems that they're going to need. And because of my Six Sigma background and my process reengineering background, I like to brag I'm the laziest CFO you'll ever meet because I don't like crunching numbers. I like numbers being crunched for me. And so I want all my numbers coming to me with pushes of buttons, not with people with green bar paper and eye shades having to sit down there and crunch numbers. It's a complete total waste of time and money. That's what we call NVA, non value added activity, when it comes to that. And there are so many tools available to you now to automate your accounting and back office functions that you really should just have somebody come in and set all that up. So that's the first time founder. They get to a pain point where they know they need better numbers than they have. The repeat CEO or founder who's done this more than once, they already have been through that ringer, and they're just looking for somebody now who really understands SaaS, speaks the language, understands it, and can provide, that financial strategy in addition to, the numbers side of things. And that's, pretty much the two buckets. The other bucket that we're finding is that there are a lot of controllers out there who are all of a sudden they need to know SaaS. Maybe they're hired into a company because of their experience, but it's a software company. Maybe they come from a retail background, or maybe they come from a medical device background or something, and they just don't know SaaS. And they need somebody to come in and teach them how to do it. So those are kind of the three buckets that we tend to find as clients.
All right. And when you work with a company, you get the first time founder where you're coming in and you're fixing stuff, and you're fixing, educating, setting up system and process. And then you have the repeat, right? Who come in and it's just like, all right, come back. You did this for us last time. Come back, do it again. Just throws you right to work. And then you have groups where they have an internal CFO, but they need to be educated, and you walk them through how to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out of those three, which is your favorite to work with?
Probably the repeat founder,
Yeah.
because they know they already know conceptually what it is that we're going to do, and they just hand it over to us and stand back and let
Yeah.
us fix it. And that's not to say that I don't really enjoy working with the first time founders, because those, in some ways, bluntly, they're less jaded. And it's still exciting to them. It's not like, gee, I've been through this, I'm going to do it again. And they, whatever it happens to be. So it's really, I guess it's hard to say that I prefer one over the other, because each has their own attraction. The one is, here, I know what you need to do, go take care of it for me. The other was, show me that you know what you're doing and teach me how to do it too. And I love teaching. And I'm
Yeah.
never gonna. That's just an internal thing that I love doing. I love educating people. I love teaching them. I love watching those light bulbs pop off when there's like, oh, that's what that is.
That's what
And
it is. Yeah.
almost every time we come in, there's always those aha moments where somebody says, I had no idea that's what was going on.
Copy
I had
that.
no idea we were wasting money on that, or I had no idea we were doing that well. Um, but what we mainly do first, what accounting does is it's a great big illuminator. It's like the electron microscope of the business world. You really gives you the very fine detail information, and then you can draw back up at a higher level to get the bigger picture of where is the company right now and where has it been. And taking that information and then turning it into forward-looking financial statements and projections, that kind of starts where you're bridging into the finance world. And then you're adding on things like, how, what's our pre-money valuation when we go into this round? How much dilution do we want? How much money are we going to take in? Of that cash, what are we going to do with it? So you get into a lot of organizational planning and, planning forward in terms of how we're going to achieve scale. Then in the background, what are the systems that we need to put into place so that we don't choke on our own success?
What do you mean? Okay. What do you mean by choking in on your own success? What does that mean?
So what that means is that you get caught flat-footed by volume. So let's say you're running transactions right now. Let's say your sales order system right now is working fine. You're doing 5 to 10 deals a month. Things are working okay. And then all of a sudden you reach that hockey stick point. And instead of 5 to 10 deals a month, now it's 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50. And that system that worked fine for 5 to 10 is completely inappropriate for 50 to 100. It just doesn't work. It was originally a manual system, and that's when things really start to choke.
Mm.
You either have to throw bodies at it, which drives up your back office costs or your sales ops cost. And that's usually where we see the pain points also in scaling. And I've done this more than a few times, is when companies start off, what they typically start off with in the back office and in their operations area is what I call a tech pile, right? So, oh, we need an accounting system. Okay, let's go grab QuickBooks. We need a payroll system. Well, let's go grab Gusto. We need a CRM. Let's go grab HubSpot. We need a CSM. Let's go get Onboard. We need a budgeting tool. Okay, let's go download something from the internet. And what you have is you have, 4 or 5 systems, not a single one of which talks to the other or integrates with the other. And so when you're asked the question, how many customers do we have? A very basic one. Well, HubSpot says one thing, Onboard says another, and accounting says a third. And oh, by the way, we call it the, say, University of Michigan here, but over here we call it the UNIV dot of MI, and over here we call it U of M. And it's like I have 3 different names all for the same customer.
Mm.
And so it's that kind of grit, and I call it grit, sand in the machine that really clogs things up when you try to scale. Because what you should be doing is from the beginning is designing these systems with a plan in mind to say, okay, this is our accounting system. We're going to set it up this way. We're going to name customers this particular way. When we add a CRM, we're going to set up the same products that we have in accounting, the same nomenclature of naming customers the same way. Now we're going to add other information to it, but we want that information to come into the CRM first and then get exported to QuickBooks, not where I have to put in 2 at the same time. So instead of entering that data twice, I'm entering it once. And if you add a CPQ, which is a quoting machine on top of it, same thing. You want everything harmonized. And so this is where we really excel with our clients, is to say, okay, look, you have this tech pile. We're going to turn it into a tech stack. And we're going to turn it into a tech stack by harmonizing and rationalizing the data sets across all of them and integrating them so they're talking to each other, so that you end up with single point of data entry rather than multiple. You prevent errors in data entry at the beginning rather than running a bunch of reports to try and find them afterwards. So we use Deming's, hierarchy of prevention versus detection versus correction when it comes to internal controls. We use the Japanese technique for whoever owns the data, whoever owns the product, the creation of the product is the best person in charge of its quality. In accounting and finance, whoever owns the data is in the best position for ensuring its quality. And just keep using these techniques over and over again.
I got it. So there's a big difference from someone who has SaaS experience CFO versus someone who might have manufacturing CFO, and the details of the things that you're like a surgeon, a heart surgeon versus a brain surgeon. So having that specialization allows you to come in and see what systems should even be there, how to do that, and from the finance, you have the ability to kind of look at the whole project and say, this is what other people are using, and this is what you should have, right? Your
Mm-hmm.
tech stack and all that.
Yeah.
So when you're talking to a first-time founder, what is one of the biggest mindset shifts that they have to overcome, or to work with a group like yours? Like what for them, versus, hey, I can figure this out on my own, versus, all right, we really need Anthony.
It's exactly what you just said. They have to come to the realization that they don't know how to do this, right? That this is a specialty.
Yeah,
And it's like when you're a CEO, when you're a first time company founder, you're starting out, you're doing literally everything, right? Because you
totally.
can't afford to hire in, maybe you have limited capital resources. But you don't want to get into the trap where you're the know it all, right? In the beginning, you're running marketing, you're running sales, you're running delivery, you're running, finance, you're running it all, right? Well, sooner or later, you got to start taking those parts of you and giving them to other people who are really experts in how to run it. And it usually follows that order. Usually you turn over marketing first because you need somebody to fill your pipeline. And then you're probably the lead salesperson. Well, then you need to turn sales over to somebody else so you can focus on delivery. Then you need to turn delivery over to somebody else so that you can focus on strategy. And these numbers things almost always end up last, right?
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, I'll get to that eventually. Well, what'll happen is, no, it'll get to you eventually, because sooner or later it's going to sneak up on you and you're going to need numbers that you don't have.
totally.
And that's usually the point where the bulb goes off and says, really need somebody to come in here and fix it. The problem that I've seen too many times is that there are a lot of people out there who call themselves CFOs, but what they are is really glorified accountants. And they came from a controlling background or a controller background or primarily an accounting background. And there's this old saying like, if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, all of your problems begin to resemble nails.
Yeah.
It applies also when you're primarily an accountant and you're trying to do finance. And accounting is great, but it's like we said, it's historical, it's backward looking. It's not looking at things like the most important metrics. What are the two most important metrics that every SaaS CEO should have in their mind at all times? What do you think?
Yeah, it should be lifetime value of a customer and the cost to get a customer, right?
I would go even more basic than that. It's sales and cash.
Okay.
Sales, number one, are your sales growing? Number two, do you have enough cash to make it to the next round? Right? Because without cash, you're dead. Okay, it doesn't matter. You can't spend net income. You can't spend gap revenue. You can only spend cash. And so cash forecasting is something that accountants are very typically, historically, I found very uncomfortable doing. They're great at reconciling bank accounts and finding out what happened to the cash. But when you sit down and say, okay, I'm going to put together a cash forecast, the first part of the cash forecast is the sales forecast. Off of the sales forecast, I have to derive a collections forecast because those sales turn into accounts receivable, turn into cash. That's number one, most important forecast that anybody has to do, in my opinion. And that's really kind of one of those moments where I sit down with first time founders and even second time founders and say, I want to really reorient your attention to these two metrics. The other ones are important. We will get to those. But most important, where are your sales going? And how does that turn into receipts? Because you need that in addition to your investment money to run your company. And if you don't have growth in sales, A, your metrics aren't going to look great anyway because you're not growing your sales. And if you run out of cash, all of your investors are going to be really upset at you for not telling them that you're about to run out of cash and that your company is going to shut down. And so I'm really huge on the cash and sales metrics above all else for these, for these startups because it is really the most important. Those are the two most important.
Yeah. Awesome, awesome. When it comes to the work that you're doing, you mentioned investors, right? So I'm a SaaS company, I'm doing okay, and I come to you and I say I need help, and you say, Josh, I think you need to raise some money. And I'm like, well, we're making money over here, and we're maybe even we're profitable, but you look at something and you're like, I think you should raise money. What would be that, if any, especially if I'm profitable? Like, what would be a scenario where you look at a business and say you should raise money?
Well, if you're where I would come in and say you should raise money is, well, first of all, most of the companies that we work with, the vast majority are not profitable. Okay,
Okay.
VC-backed tech startups tend not to be profitable because they're really focused on scaling their sales. The most important inflection point I've found for when you really need to bring in investment money is when you have finally decoded the DNA of the go-to-market. In other words, we know exactly we know exactly who our ideal customer is. We know exactly what watering holes they go to get their information.
Mm-hmm.
We've dialed in what message that resonates with them. And once we have them in-house, we know how to close them, right? Once you have that figured out, you should go get a bunch of money because that tells me all you need to do is push money into that process in order to get sales out of it.
Yeah.
And the rest of it follows along. Then you hire your developers to continue to enhance the product. You hire your support and delivery people to deliver the product, et cetera, on and on.
Yeah.
But it really is the most important struggle point that I see with the tech startups is that four-step process of the go-to-market. Do you really have your segmentation clearly identified as to who your ICP is, your ideal customer profile is? Within that profile, do you understand exactly who within that company is the person that you need to talk to, the decision maker, in order to get the sale? Do you have a message and a channel to get the message to them so that they respond and come to you? And once you have them in-house, do you have a really solid close process in order to bring that sales opportunity to a closed contract status? That I can't tell you how many times I continue to see the struggle in those, and it's hard. There's no magic involved in this. It's a lot of it's trial and error. A lot of it is instinct. A lot of it is just being really good at marketing. I am not going to tell you. I'm like the coach. I'm not going to go out there and play that game, but I can tell you when you're not playing it right.
Mm.
Okay, and that one right there is one where I'm constantly having to say, well, yeah, you can go out and get more money, but what are you going to do with it? And how does this really help you grow the ARR? It's
Mm-hmm.
really the blunt question. How is this money bringing in the money that you're going to bring, because you're going to dilute yourself? How is this going to increase the value? The valuation is almost always increased by heavy growth in sales.
One thing you mentioned, so that's great. You mentioned like the time to pump in money is when you figured out your sales engine, right? Your revenue engine. Once you figured that out, money in, money out, right?
Mm-hmm.
What happens when people get money too soon, where they haven't had that figured out? I mean, that's kind of like a softball pitch for you. What kind of scenarios does it make sense to raise money before, and what could go wrong there?
Well, so that's your seed round, right? So
Yeah.
you haven't gotten market traction yet. You've got an MVP, a minimum viable product. Maybe you have a few sales out there. Now you're going out getting your seed money. That seed money should be used to figure out what I just said. How do you get that go to market really dialed in?
Yeah.
If you're not using that seed money to primarily focus on how to grow the top line and decode the DNA of the sales process, then you're wasting it. And what'll happen is you'll run out of cash, or you start running out of cash, and you won't have the market traction to show an investor for your A round
Mm-hmm.
that you're ready for growth.
Bigger money and bigger growth. Yeah. Yeah, super awesome. The DNA of the sales process, is that part of the four-step process? Is that what you were mentioning?
That to me is that's just the term that I use to describe the whole thing, which
Okay.
is that ICP, the who all that who are where they are, what the messaging is, and most important, once you have them, you have to close them. Okay, if you have an incompetent sales team that can't close a door, then all that hard work goes to nothing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you really got to be able, once you bring them in, you really got to land the contract, because in the end that's your business, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we got all these leads. Okay, that's great. So how many of them are converting into sales? Crickets. Okay, well, that tells me right there where we have a problem.
You can't even close a door.
Yeah.
So, one of the hardest things that I see founders struggle with, so they're quick to delegate out. Okay, you take over this, you take over that. One of the things that I see like a really stumbling block is when they start to go, we need someone to take over sales, because usually the CEO is the best, salesperson, unless they're a technical founder or whatever. But like usually they're the hardest driving salesperson, and letting go of that process, letting go of that responsibility. I see a lot of people struggle in that. Now, if they're a technical founder, they can't wait to get rid of that, right?
Hmm.
What's some advice do you have for that founder who's just the best salesperson, right? And nobody else can replace them because they're the best, right?
It starts with having a sales playbook that actually makes sense. And I mean that sincerely. Okay, I can go out and sell what I'm doing with SaaS Gurus, for example. But if I don't really clearly understand what the pain points are, what the value proposition is, how to phrase it in a way that's digestible by the prospect, and how to get them across the finish line to the close, if I don't fully understand that in detail and can describe it in detail, how on earth am I going to bring a salesperson in who doesn't know my business that well, or maybe comes from a related business, and have them hope to do this? So yes, if you're the CEO founder and you're the best salesperson in the organization, that of course, as you pointed out, it's a major weakness, because if something happens to you, then the entire organization falls apart. But you need to be able to clone yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to do that is to have a very clearly established playbook. And then it doesn't have to be like this fancy written document that's tomes long, it's thousands and tens of, no, it doesn't have to be. It could be bullet points. But it has to be really clear where you can hand it over to a sales leader who understands it and says, okay, I get where this is coming from. I can use my experience. I know how to turn this into sales. That's my advice.
Copy that. With all the companies that you're working on, getting them ready for sale, right? So, a part of the growth is, maybe the CEO wants to move on and go do another business, be the repeat founder and hire you, in the future for other things. But, they come to you and they say, I'm ready to start thinking about selling this 2 years out or whatever the case may be. What are some things from your perspective that they should start doing or planning or preparing to get that to happen?
So there's two sides to that one. You know how in real estate they say location, 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 right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In selling a company, it's documentation, documentation, documentation. Having your virtual data room set up and ready to go, where you have all of your major customer contracts, all of your major contracts, period, your sales forecasts, all of the information that a due diligence person is going to want to look at. Having that set up and ready to go is number one. Number two, you have to have something worth selling. Okay, so yeah, you can tell me you want to prepare for sale in 2 years. My first question is going to be, are you going to be saleable in 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that means is if you, as the CEO, were, God forbid, run over by a truck, will the company continue? Will it continue on the same trajectory? Because if you are the company, you don't have anything to sell. We outlawed slavery back in the 1800s. Okay, you can't sell yourself. You can't give yourself to the acquirer. And I mean that very bluntly. You, as the CEO and founder, need to be able to step aside. And yeah, there's probably going to be a transition period of a year or two or something like that post sale. Of course, there always is. But that has to be, the acquirer has to be comfortable in the knowledge that without you, they have something that's worth what they paid for and then some.
Yeah.
So if you want to get ready for an exit in a couple of years, you have to make sure that A, you can be divorced from the company and there's still something to sell, that you can clearly communicate that to the acquiring organization so that they understand, yes, you can leave and the wheels won't come off the bus, as it were. And then behind all of that, all of the documentation that you're going to need to provide them the comfort that what they're in fact buying is what they're buying, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the old thing about pig in a poke, right? Do you know what that? I had to actually look up that once to find out what is a poke. A poke is a bag, right?
Okay. Explain what this is? A pig and a poke?
Pig in a poke, right? So
Yeah.
if you're buying a pig in a poke, if you're buying something in a bag, if I hand you a bag and say, here's a pig, and you can't look in the bag, then you don't know what's actually in there,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, buying, as they say, buying a pig in a poke. Okay, it's buying in the bag. Right? Are you buying a pig or are you buying, a peacock? Okay, you buying
You're
something
right.
beautiful. I'm probably insulting all the pig owners out there now, but that's all right.
We have a lot of pig owners listening into this podcast. We actually thought about, the pig scout, but the deal scout
Pig scout.
it wasn't yet
Yeah,
purchased.
some of them are pigs. You can put lipstick on it, but it's still a pig.
You could put lipstick on, or yeah,
So think of it that way. It's like you're putting lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig. Um, and that's partly why, not partly, primarily why you want to make sure that, you have sales contracts that show that you're truly SaaS.
yeah,
You don't want to have money back guarantees in them. It's got to be, one way, non-refundable, paid in advance. You got to make sure that what you're selling is primarily software and not services, because service revenue doesn't give you much of a multiple. Software revenue does. There are a lot of companies where I come in and they're like, well, we're charging for the software, and then we have these, look at all the money we're making off of implementation. And I'm just like trying not to shake my head at that and say that the valuation off of your services revenue is 1x, The valuation off your software revenue is going to be 10 and above. Where do you
Mm.
want your revenue?
You want all your revenue in the software side
Right.
multiplier,
So
right?
what you want to do is you want to structure your contracts so that they are software with a support network to go behind it, but not one where you're billing for that. Not one where you're doing hourly billing or you're billing. If you have an upfront implementation, make sure it's like tiny and that you're collecting it on the software. Because I've heard that, well, we have to spend so much time and effort to get our customers up and running. Well, I have two challenges to that. Why? Okay, why does it take so much to get them up and running? That right there is a problem because it's going to impact your gross margin. And gross margins are huge in software. And so, how do you get it so that the product almost stands itself up for the customer? And that's number one. Number two is don't bill for that separately. You might have, do the old, gold, platinum, iridium level of software, right? Your gold level gets you this support, your platinum gets you this support, et cetera, et cetera. But you you kind of have to play a game here with reality versus perception. If you put it on your income statement as software and services separately, first person's going to take a look at that and say, okay, yep, that's services. We're not going to value that at all. But if you have just software on your income statement, they're going to look at that and say, oh, look at all the software here. But you better darn well have gross margins that back that up.
Yeah. So this is interesting. I love this software versus service multiples, right? Like, and you're saying like one of the key points you pointed out for people who are wanting to, build a company to sell, right? You want multiples, right? You want the 10 multiple, right? You don't want the one multiple. So you ask the question, they're like, our software's here, but standing it up is over here, and you're like, why is it not standing it up on its own?
Mm-hmm.
Explain that into detail because I think that is such a golden nugget of how to increase your multiple for founders out there. That is beautiful.
Well, what it comes down to is when somebody onboards your software, and we're talking primarily in the B2B space. In the B2C space, I don't see this as much, but in the B2B space, let's say you're selling, some sort of health tech and you're having to deal with a healthcare organization and there's a lot of security concerns and, HIPAA compliance and all this other stuff. And so you want to make sure that you have a secure organization and that you're not having to scramble for that. But a lot of times there's a data migration phase. And you see this a lot in ERP, for example,
Mm-hmm.
where you have to take your legacy data, what you have right now, and convert it and import it into the new system so that you get, you know, out of the new system what you're looking for. That piece right there, if it's taking you a lot of time and effort to, migrate data from an existing system into your system, you need to look at ways to automate that. You need to look at AI or machine learning or some sort of automation tools. And I can't give you the details because it's really situational specific.
Yeah.
But that's one where it's like, well, it just takes forever because we've got to clean up all their data and get it in there. Well, that's a problem because if you're spending a lot of time cleaning up their data, you're not going to get multiples off of that work.
Wow.
Once you have them in, that's great. It's probably sticky at that point because once you've converted them, it's probably hard for them to exit. But you want to make that go as quickly as possible. I'll use the example of Duo Security. Duo Security is one of the unicorns that I worked with. I was their senior director of finance and accounting, worked for their CFO. They eventually, I joined the company. They were about 10 million in revenue. I left the company. It was about 150 million in revenue. That was 3 years later. That was just astronomical growth. And they
Say that
exited.
again.
When I joined the company, they were about 10 million in ARR.
Yep.
When I left the company about 3.5 years later, they were at 130 million.
Wow, that is massive growth.
Yeah, it is. And so, when I'm talking about scaling and setting things up for scale, it is not just theoretical for me. That's the second time in my life I had to take a company and add a zero to their revenue in 3 years and not have anything break. And that was my job, just like it was for the manufacturing company. The same thing here was primarily on the back office side of things, is setting up the financial reporting, the budgeting, the cash forecasting, the financial modeling, all the SaaS metrics, making sure that that could all scale and that we didn't choke on our own success. It was also a prime example of where your CRM has to be really in harmony with everything else or you're going to run into problems. But the way that the Duo folks designed their software was they could take a company, say 10 or 20,000 people. Now, this is their first product was a two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. Everybody does it now, right?
Yeah.
Back then, they were kind of in the blazing edge of it because it was a phone app, and all you had to do was click a button on the phone app. You didn't have to type any numbers back into anything. That's still a system, but it's not as convenient. And they were able to take, organizations that had, 10,000 people and within a span of 72 hours have a 95% adoption rate of the new system. How? They had gone into it designing it to make it easy
Yeah.
for people to adopt their product.
Yeah.
And that forethought going in ahead saying, how do I not only do how do I make a software that's sticky and that my customers don't ever want to give up, but how do I make it easy for me to get them on board? Because if it's easy for me, it's easy for them, right? They have a great customer experience because, wow, you got us up and running really fast. The other guys took 3 months. You took 3 days. That's incredible. Let me go tell my other CISO friends about this. And so they spread the word of mouth. A delighted customer is an evangelical customer. They will tell other people about you because they're excited. A merely satisfied customer, okay, maybe they'll get around to telling somebody about you. So what Duo did was really great because they adopted, consciously adopted the mantra, stole it from Southwest Airlines to be the most loved company in cybersecurity. And they did it by making their product almost stand up itself. They also had a product that was very highly quality oriented so that there were very few defects and bugs in the system, which then reduces your customer support profile. So you reduce your delivery profile by making it easy to implement. You reduce your customer support profile. Well, by profile, I mean your internal costs by having a really high quality product that doesn't break.
Yeah.
And then your gross margins end up being, really nice and fat because you have great sales, but you don't have a lot of folks in your delivery department, your implementation department, and you don't have a lot of folks in support. And both of those are a drag on gross margin. Now I'm speaking as the accountant. Anybody who says that customer success is not part of cost of sales doesn't understand accounting. It is absolutely part of cost of sales because if you didn't have sales, those people don't have jobs. Done.
Yeah.
Simple, right? So, because I've seen, and that's another thing, I come in and I'll see customer success down in operations, and I'm like, nope, that's not right. That's not where it belongs. It belongs up in gross margin.
What's it matter where it belongs? A
Because
budgeting issue?
gross margin is one of the most critical metrics for SaaS. You can have a great SaaS company, but if your gross margin is 50 or 60%, you have a pig in a poke. If you have a SaaS company and your gross margins are 80% above, you have a peacock.
And
Because
in
that's
this situation, do we want a pig or a peacock? I'm just kidding.
you definitely want the pretty bird. You don't want the stinky mammal. Okay, and this is an important point that I try to hammer home. Now that I think about it, you'd asked the question earlier. What are some of those realization and aha moments? One of them is the focus on gross margin. When we come into a company and I see negative gross margin, that's an immediate alarm bell to me. It's like, okay, what's going on here? Do I have a classification problem? In other words, I'm putting the wrong costs in gross margin, and I need to take a look at that first and make sure all the proper costs are going in. Do I need to allocate some of those costs out to say, these people are doing implementation, they're also coding. Okay, well then part of them goes to development. But what I'm really focused on is for every dollar that you sell, how many dollars does that free up to run the rest of the organization?
Yeah.
That being R&D, marketing and sales, and G&A. Those are your three big buckets, right? R&D, marketing and sales, G&A. That's everything after and below the gross margin line. When you're acquired, one of the areas they're going to eliminate is your G&A area, right? Because whoever acquires you, they have finance and accounting and HR and IT and all the other stuff. That's one of the things they're going to look at reducing out of your cost profile to enhance profitability when they bring you in-house. So making that, take that out of the equation, you're left with R&D and sales and marketing. That gross margin is what funds those and the profitability. And without high gross margin, you're not really a software company and you're not going to get great valuations.
Yeah. We're almost out of time. And maybe on the next interview or the next time we chat, I want to talk about acquisitions, right? We spent a lot of time of inside a business to increase multiples, and that was incredible. What a great realization that was for me, and I appreciate that. But we're wrapping up, and I want to do a few things. One, I want to give you an opportunity if someone's in the audience going, hey, all right, I need help, right? I need someone to come in who understands SaaS, on the accounting and financial and the finance side. Like, I need you. Where can people go to connect with you and do a deal?
The best way to get a hold of me is go to my website, saas-gurus.com, saas-gurus.com, and there's a contact us there. It's also very easy to find me on LinkedIn. I'm all over the place. It's Anthony Nitsos, Nitsos, N like Nancy, T like Tom, SOS like the distress signal. And I pride myself on being very responsive to people that reach out to me. If you reach out to me, the first thing I'm going to want to do is set up what I call as a diagnostic, okay, a gap analysis, an audit. And what we'll do is I'll spend an hour to an hour and a half with you on a call, and we're going to run through everything that you're doing right now. And out of that one particular meeting, I will be able to tell you exactly where you need to focus your efforts and how we're going to fix the back office in order to make it better for you. And by better, I mean illuminate things that you haven't seen before and give you information to make decisions about your company that you've never had before.
Super cool.
Otherwise, what's the point, right?
Otherwise, what's the point?
Right.
Yeah.
If you already have it all dialed in, you don't need us.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you need us because we're SaaS finance experts and we really understand that space, but it starts with the fundamentals. I go back to my medical school training. The finance and accounting system of your organization is like the spinal column of your body. If you don't have a really good, solid backbone and spinal organization, everything else that hangs off of it isn't going to work right. And it works in organizations the same as it does in bodies. You really need that financial core set up properly and optimized, because from that, all sorts of information flows that you need to run the business most effectively. If you don't agree with that, then you're probably not a good match for us.
Right. And that's okay, right? There's a lot of SaaS companies out there.
Yeah. I know a lot of SaaS founders. I don't have to worry about that. Look, my sales are great. Okay, good. I'm happy for you.
You might be a good acquisition target in the future, right? So there's probably a question, one last question, what question should I have asked you, right? Like, I always like to go, my knowledge is limited, as I learn and grow in my wisdom and in my experience, I got to know that there's things I don't even know what to ask. So what should I have asked you?
I don't think there was anything, Josh. You really hit on the most important points, in my opinion, which are, what are the key metrics you really need to look at as a SaaS owner, and how do you get those?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we specialize in. And then above and beyond that, I think the only thing that we could spend a lot of time on is, how do you value your company when you're going into an investment round?
Yeah. Gosh.
Or going for a purchase, looking to be sold.
Yeah, we'll have to explore doing another show, because we got to talk about value in business, and that's not just a 2-minute chat, right?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
That one, you need some lubrication for your brain and a lot of time to talk about it, because it's like there's a lot goes into that, and it's just as much art as it is science.
Yeah. So the next time we chat, we'll talk about valuing your business and acquisitions, right? You'll give us some key points of when should a software company look at acquisitions. But that's all for today. One more time, Anthony, thanks for coming on the show. Fellow deal makers in the audience, my ask to you is always reach out to our guests, say thank you for being on the show. If you're a SaaS company and you could use some help, his contact information will be in the show notes below. Connect directly with our guests and say, hey, heard you on the Deal Scout. Let's do a deal. Let's figure out a way to work together. If you have a deal that you'd like to talk about it here on the show, the mission and purpose of the show is to put deals and deal makers together. That's how we make money. That's how we learn and grow. And it's just a blast doing it. You can head over to thedealscout.com, fill out a quick form, and maybe get you on the show next. Till then, we will talk to you all on the next episode. See you guys.